episode of Play That Rock and Roll, where we take a look back at the albums and artists of the classic rock era.
Just about every year sees the release of a Christmas album from some washed-up oldies act that hasn't been relevant since the 1980s, and 2009 was no exception.
That year, the artist in question was REO Bob Dylan.
Rolling Stone magazine just put Bob Dylan's Christmas in the Heart on their best Christmas albums of all time list, proving once again that Rolling Stone will lick the boots of whatever contractually obligated garbage Dylan puts out. Fuck this album and fuck this guy. Dylan hasn't been interesting since Joker Man.
I mean, I'm not going to say anything that you're going to get any revelations about. I mean, it's not going to happen.
Do you know what we got from him this year? A Frank Sinatra cover record of all fucking things.
Because that's what people want. Anyway, I'm sorry to go off on a tangent already, but to be perfectly honest, today's subject is not terribly interesting.
REO Speedwagon is a pretty boring band. And I'm saying that as a fan of REO Speedwagon.
I mean it. I like more than just the greatest hits, and I've seen them in concert like 4 times.
In my Grace Slick retrospective, I mentioned that the first couple of years of the 1980s were not great for rock and roll. Punk, hair metal, and new wave were in their earliest forms, and a number of heavy hitters of the genre were either out of steam or chasing trends. To fill the void created by all this, a number of B-listers from the late 70s found themselves front and center. These years were dominated by bands like Journey, Foreigner, Styx, and today's subject, REO Speedwagon. While I like most of these bands, it's fairly certain that they represent the low point of the golden age of rock.
The rock bands that came to the fore at the end of the 70s, such as Styx, Journey, and REO Speedwagon, got themselves a new nickname.
There was a term for a while called corporate rock.
The Speedwagon and Styx and Journey and Foreigner and all those kind of bands. Should we throw Chicago in there? Oh, no. It was just too lightweight.
None of these bands were particularly influential, and the genres that followed, like punk and new wave, seemed to come about almost as a reaction to these guys sitting on top of the charts. And before the decade was over, most of these bands had fallen out of the limelight and have been following a very similar career path. Since the early 90s, many of these bands have utilized a sort of template for their release schedules, along with touring regularly, often with each other. The latter-day catalogs for these artists all include at least some of the following, be it a cover record, expanded re-releases, archived live shows, a new album that doesn't do so well, maybe an album with a symphony, way too many post-2000 live albums, and of course, a Christmas record. REO Speedwagon checked a couple of those off their post-relevancy list, and in 2007 released their last album of original material, which was their first in over a decade.
I've been thinking too much. I've been drinking too much. Oh, and thinking and drinking for me is a dangerous combination.
It's not great. And by great, I mean as good as classic Speedwagon. They worked hard to sell the record, but it was mostly overlooked. So less than 2 years later, they decided to follow it up with today's subject, called Not So Silent Night, Christmas with REO Speedwagon.
Ugh, that dorky title is very appropriate.
Nobody was asking for this record, so I genuinely wonder what my expectations should be for it. What were they trying to achieve with this album? Because Christmas with REO Speedwagon isn't enough information. They are not unique enough for that. Like, what would set this apart from a Christmas album from Styx or Journey?
Beats me. So we're just gonna have to examine it for what it is. Here's Not So Silent Night, Christmas with REO Speedwagon. Hit it.
The first Noel.
Now, I'm not going to make you listen to the whole record. As you may imagine, a number of these songs just blend together. So let's stick to the highs and lows. As for this first song, It's only a minute long, which is odd. It's like an unfinished demo. Not bad, but a strange way to open a record. A short instrumental might have been more effective. This song, along with one other, is probably the high point of the record. The song is a good match for the band, and it is just uncommon enough for the band to make it their own.
God rest you, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day.
Again, this isn't bad. These two songs demonstrate the best REO has to offer the Christmas genre. Straightforward, but competent versions of lesser-known classics. It's probably not fair to expect much more than that.
You know what season it is? It's a season to be jolly, baby. Wipe those tears out of your eyes.
Now this right here has got to be the low point. Vocalist Kevin Cronin's in-song banter is straight up cringe-inducing. And unfortunately, it's probably the only aspect that makes this record distinctly REO Speedwagon.
Well, I promise you, darling, if I have to put on my galoshes, walk all the way home from St. Louis.
Shut up. This is why lead vocalists always need to be kept on a short leash. Now, the other major problem here is that some of these songs are absolute Christmas classics, and in a few cases, the band is just not up to it, musically or vocally.
So this is Christmas, and what have you done?
I know the Beatles were a huge influence on REO Speedwagon, but singing one of Lennon's songs does not make it by default a touching tribute. Last year I talked about how Jimmy Buffett also covered this song, but his version, while not as good as the original, resonates a little bit more because it's like one of the great jokers of rock and roll is trying to be serious for a moment. But in this case, Cronin is just in over his head.
I'll have a blue Christmas without you.
Kind of the same thing going on here. This time it's bassist Bruce Hall singing, but again, vocally, he's not up to it. The version made famous by Elvis is iconic, so there is just no reason to listen to this one instead, because they don't really do anything new with it. If you play it too safe, no one is going to care. Case in point right here, there are a number of classic versions of this song, from Bob Seger to The Temptations to Joan Jett, so why would anyone pick this version? That pretty much says it all about the album itself. These versions are just not as good as the versions produced by REO's classic rock contemporaries. And to be quite honest, not as good as their classic rock contemporaries is how one could describe REO Speedwagon itself.
And again, I say that as a fan.
Roll with the Changes, Don't Let 'Em Go, Riding the Storm Out, Golden Country. These guys wrote some great songs, and they're a talented band.
But the fundamental problem with this band is that they have always played it way too safe. And that really shows through on this album.
I've seen this band 4 times, and all 4 times it was the same exact show. Not just the same songs each time, but the same songs in the same order with the same stage banter in between each time. What's really damning is that one of the shows I saw was a December 2010 charity concert. Perfect setting for Christmas music, and only 1 year after they released this album. But they did not play a single track from this album on that night or any other night of the tour, which leads me to believe they themselves don't take this album very seriously.
And that may be all we need to know. Sometimes an album is just product. And like most of the product pushed around this time of year, This album should really just be left in the stores. With that, happy holidays, and thanks again for yet another great year.
So we're going to surprise the eHarmony couple with a little serenade of the song of their choice. I'm going to keep
So, people use Keep On Loving You for their wedding song, right? And I think to myself, dude, did you listen to the lyric and the verses of this thing?
And I meant every word I said when I said that I love you. I meant that I love you forever. I tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna keep on loving you. 'Cause it's the only thing I want to do.
So beautiful.
That's when things got real ugly for us. We made some pretty silly videos. They were some of the most embarrassing moments that I can remember. When Duran Duran comes out and they're all like, male model handsome, and then we show up and it's like, how do you compete with that?